Before we move on to questions, I would like to ask the director. Andrzej, you appear in a peculiar role because on one hand you worked for Radio Free Europe for many years, partly in the West and partly in Free Poland in Warsaw, once the Radio Free Europe opened its office in Warsaw. So for the first part of your professional life, you wrote the story, and then you tell the story or retell the story using radio and film archival materials. So I want to ask you, how do you do this kind of work? What is it like to work with such materials? As for this film, I think its greatest strength is that it shows the original materials in context. It is mostly a compilation of original tracks. So how do you do this? How do you work with such materials? Because I can imagine it's not so simple. You sit down in front of a box of cassettes where you have hours, dozens, hundreds of hours of material, and you need to select something. How do you do it?
I feel a bit like a custodian of remembrance about Free Europe Radio, and I translate it into the language of the contemporary historical journalism. It did so happen that, as you said, I've worked in Free Europe for many years, and I dealt with these materials, and I saw them being created. It was before Internet existed, so I didn't have access or awareness of the archive. I knew they existed, but I didn't know fully what they included. And then in front of my eyes, the world was changing technologically, and it was excellent because it turned out the rooms of tapes changed into the rooms of diskettes, then hard drives that we can somehow manage. At some moment when Free Europe was closed in Munich in the middle of the 90s, Jan Nowak-Jeziorański, who was in this film, the former director of the Free Europe Polish Radio, forced Americans to create the copies of all tapes that survived, and they were just part of the archive of the activities of Free Europe since 1952 up until now. Americans did that, and they forwarded to Warsaw to the National Digital Archive. Once I came to Polish radio and I started to deal with online with the internet portal website, I was aware that Free Europe existed, and that these resources cannot be that you need to have access to them through internet. And through a few months, 2-3 months, with the current operational budget of the portal, we have digitized 30,000 tapes. There were trucks going between the National Digital Archive and Polish Radio. People night and day were just changing the tapes in the recorders, and this is how within a few months we created a collection. We call it Freedom Radios. There are archives of the Free Europe Radio, but also what was given to us from BBC, what Anna Bernhardt from Radio France Internationale, who's in the room with us, gave us. She worked there, and we received the remains of RFI, and this is all that we included in the Freedom portal, Freedom Radio portal, and this is over 500,000 of minutes of recordings. Being aware of that, I decided when we had in 2012 the anniversary of Free Europe, I decided to create a documentary about Free Europe, and we started to work on that with my friend Jan Soszyński, and we had 5 episodes, 5 times 15 minutes. This was a kind of a cycle for Polish television, but we have collected so much material for this series that we used 15% maybe, and we've decided that 5% is also important, and we did a huge query. We didn't have a budget. Archives are very expensive. Using television archives costs a lot of money. We were able only to contact the institutions that would give us that for free and to the Free Europe archives. So when we had the 85% of not used material, this is how we've decided to create the Cold War archive. In 2012, we had the Free Europe series, and 6 years later, the first seasons, which this quintessence, this compendium, this is what we were able to show to you today. Well, simply, these archives have such power, not only the image, also the sound, because you see the trick here. We don't have film materials, but we have excellent archival recordings of Free Europe Radio, and this is sensational material. To that, there were materials for those of you who are unable to find yourselves in those language versions. There were black and white pictures from Maison Lafitte of Free Europe. This is the cameras of Polish KGB, so the security police who surveyed Maison Lafitte, the editorial staff of Parisian Culture, and we received a lot of materials from secret police. So once the series started, we would receive more materials, including former secret policemen who had something at home, and it became like an avalanche, and there was really a lot of this material. We wanted to have just one season, 18 episodes. We did 6 seasons, 104 episodes, and another cycle on the side, War in the Ether. I don't want to talk about that, but there were also about 160 episodes, just 5 minutes short, very short ones. This is really amazing because there is sound and image, but also contact with the thought, which is expressed. Because we've heard a moment ago what were the conclusions of Zbigniew Brzeziński and Hillary Clinton afterwards, and afterwards Barack Obama. And despite that, they didn't take a decision at that time which would protect Europe and the world against what is happening now. So when you watch these materials, you listen to them, those materials from years ago, you hear, you see correct conclusions, and watching them many years later, you know if these conclusions brought up any smart decisions or not, rather. When you're confronted with that, is that frustrating? Or maybe you just realize, yeah, this is how it is in life, that sometimes we draw the right conclusions, but not necessarily. Or they're expressed in life, or they drive the right decisions. How do you feel it? Because outside the mind, there are also emotions. For me, it's motivating. Jan Nowak-Jeziorański said that he feels like a soldier on the front of the Cold War, of the psychological front. I can say that I feel the same. I started to feel like that in the 80s, but it didn't evaporate from me. When we started to work on this film in 2018, the series, we didn't have the full-scale war made by Putin, but Crimea was already in Russian hands. The era of reset in the relationship, we've heard it in the words of Brzeziński, Obama, Hillary Clinton, but so this era was ending, but there was no awareness yet that we simply have to face the approaching confrontation. I wanted to stress that this is just the first season, what you're seeing here, because in subsequent years we have escalated our emotions, our stance towards what was happening, is happening, and the last 2 seasons were directly about the confrontation. It was our confrontation with the Russian offensive with Putin. I used to go to the east very often, to Russia, in the previous years. I made also peace films about Akhmatova, Nabokov, Brodsky. You also translated literature. Yes, but with the third season, I understood that I'll not go there for a longer time because it might be a trip burdened with the risk, which is not worth taking. With the fifth and sixth season, it was clear that this film is closing the path completely and that we became the part of this front of the Cold War. Now it's not Cold War anymore, not cold. And we were not hiding it. This was a cycle, a series where you couldn't be just not taking sides. We had our ideas and we expressed it, so you couldn't be impartial. And through the historical recordings of such people as Jerzy Giedroyć, Leopold Unger, political commentator from Brussels, Zbigniew Brzeziński, and all those names that are appearing here, showing that there is nothing new, that all that, we knew about all that. It was discussed, some heard it, and the majority of people didn't hear it. It was very difficult to break through. Brzeziński writes in his book that just his name was Ski, the ending was Ski, that he had a Polish last name. His political point of view in America, in the United States, was kind of burdened with a... He had this patch kind of, Polish kind of approach that they are against the Soviet Union because this is what they kind of take from their homes. So this is amazing. And I still, when I have this program, this is the second program of the Polish radio, second channel of the Polish radio, I encounter amazing recordings from many dozen of years ago when about the current Putin's Russia. There are people who speak about it at the time when Putin was going to preschool, I think. But they describe it, and unfortunately, I have to say, I am very much for Jerzy Giedroyć and his political thought, but we have to say one thing with sadness, that one thought of his, that we are fighting with Soviets and Russia is only the victim of the Soviet system. Unfortunately, the recent years showed that it was not completely true, that the evil of the Eastern system is encoded a bit deeper than just the Soviet cover on the Russian society or their special ways. Well, we don't know how Russians would develop if they were not brainwashed for many decades. And this is the result, the fruit of that. The society is completely destroyed. This is not a good sign. And going back to the first question, how do you choose? What decides about given piece or excerpt going to the screen or not? We record much more than we need, much more. And afterwards, it's we narrow it down. We want to look at it under a microscope. We need a multimedia thing, either both the sound and the image. We had 108 topics on the Cold War, and we were looking at it globally. We were showing the confrontation in East Asia. We showed confrontation in Cuba, Africa, Angola, but the starting point was the material. This is television, we cannot just sit there and just talk, right? Although you cannot see it from that film, but that was opinion programs in a studio. In every episode, there was 2 or 3 guests in this post-industrial kind of space. It was a fort, actually, in which there were jammers in Free Europe. This is amazing, and this is connected to this place because here in the old citadel built by the Russians, today we created the Museum of the History of Poland, and you've created a film that opens it This red wall, which is next to me, this is part of this old jammer of Free Europe. We record a lot of these conversation. We collect recordings and we use everything that was in the archives of the Polish TV. We had good researchers for every episode, which was supposed to have 35 up to 50 minutes. There were two versions, actually, 35 minutes and 50 minutes. Usually we had 4 to 5 hours of material, and we would squeeze out of that whatever you got in the end. Sometimes there was a really great conversation that would kind of pull this film. Sometimes amazing material that we would get. For instance, those photographs from Stalin's funeral. They appeared in the world when we were creating this series. An officer from the American embassy in Moscow has received an order from their bosses to record as much as possible from the embassy's window, and he recorded dozen-plus hours of material that we see here in the film. That there is a crowd and there is a tribune there, and this is. The analytics were trying to figure out what is the configuration of the people who are standing there, what will be the political system, who has the greatest hat, fur hat, who's standing in the middle. And he recorded a lot of that, and those tapes, he kept at home. And after he died, well, quite recently, this has been recovered and digitized.
Thankfully, the law in the States is such that if an American official is doing work on the job, and that is what he had done, the resulting materials end up in the public domain. There are no copyrights or authorship rights. So the material immediately was uploaded online, and we found it, and we downloaded it, and it was just an accident, but it gave us some very good footage. Or a Professor Sukiennicki who calls in 1956 that the Georgian is dead, the Georgian who tyrannized millions, and you hear him pounding his fist on the table at Radio Free Europe, recorded almost right after the death of Stalin and such. Findings allow us to recreate the atmosphere and show the emotions. Is that also a way to spark young people's interest in history? Yes, because you need to say this is an educational project to a large extent. That was the idea. I said young people, but I was also going to say and older people, because everyone should be interested in history. Ladies and gents, I can't see you, but I'm hoping somebody will raise their hand in order to ask a question, and that is actually my request. I see somebody. Anna Bernhardt. I only want to add, although it's not meant to be a polemic, Giedroyć would always emphasize that there would be no freedom in this part of Europe, and no country will be free unless Russia says goodbye or to its imperial policy. That's what Giedroyć used to say. But Andrzej, this is a marvelous film about the significance of archives, and it's a lesson for all of us. But I have a question as well. Are there any archival materials that you were unable to get your hands on for whatever reason, and that you would have liked to use in your film, in the series on the Cold War? And the other part of the question relating to archives, because I'm sure that you will be making another film about the current Cold War and beyond. How would you go about this? How would you look for archives when there are so many documents and materials and footage everywhere? How would you approach that? Could I ask for the lights to be turned on in the auditorium so that I can see the questioner, so that we can all see each other. If you could just turn up the lights because I can't see anyone. Wonderful. Thank you very much for the question. So I know the statement by Giedroyć, although recent years have shown that we need to learn how to live in freedom and sovereignty, having this neighbor to the east who, unfortunately, for the time being, is getting nowhere close to freedom and has no intention to be free or to leave others be. As for archival materials, of course, there are materials that I dream of, but I can't access them for financial reasons. Because it needs to be said, this was a series created for the History Channel, Historia, which doesn't really have a serious TV budget. So we had to either draw on the archives of friendly institutions or those in the public domain. We had a powerful team of researchers searching through the public domain. For example, on YouTube, you can find really incredible things, but you need to know how to search for them. Of course, there are archives that are my dream, or commercial institutions that archive old footage in a professional manner. And they sort of fine-tune it, digitize it, clean it up, and adapt it to today's technical requirements, but it's very costly. A documentalist I know from Israel was so surprised that we did 104 episodes based on archival materials. You must have had millions, she said, but I responded, no, we didn't. We do it by sheer willpower, because for her to make a document, she needs to find very serious big sponsors. So my dream archives are totally out of reach. They are in Moscow, first and foremost. Many people dream of getting their hands on those. Yes, I know one such person, Vladimir Bukovsky, deceased, unfortunately, who understood the small window of opportunity after the first putsch by Yanayev when Yeltsin rose to power. It seemed that the Communist Party process would prevail, so Yeltsin dreamed of a Moscow Nuremberg trial. So at this point, Bukovsky, equipped with an ultra-modern scanner for the time, traveled to Moscow to look through the materials on his own oppositional activities. He was granted access to unique footage, unique materials of the party in Moscow, and he scanned several thousand pages, taking advantage of the stupidity of the archival authorities of the Guards, creating the book, The Moscow Trial. There was no Nuremberg trial on a real scale, but Bukovsky wrote this book, and based on the documentation, he proved that it's not true that Jaruzelski protected Poland against Russian intervention with the War Measures Act. Indeed, he was begging for an intervention, and he was repulsed in Moscow. He was turned down. So there was access. Right now, well, it's no longer possible. We need to look elsewhere. However, we have good materials at Polish radio and Polish television. I am currently head of the Polish Radio Archive, and they have incredible materials. Some of them haven't even been digitized, and this opens room for a lot of potential for those who want to research contemporary history. Next question.
I'm from Prague. I'm from the Institute for the Study of the Totalitarian Regimes in Prague. I would like to ask you, is there any copy that you are selling to Czech television, or is there any idea how to broadcast this movie in Czech Republic?
Nie mieliśmy takich
We haven't had such ideas yet, but I think that Polish television would have nothing against making this film available quite cheaply to give you a license to rebroadcast this film, I believe. We had a lot in common with Prague because there is a Radio Free Europe there. It broadcasts from Prague. It moved from Munich. There is no longer a Polish, Czech, or Hungarian section, but they are broadcasting in 20+ languages. And over the next seasons, over the later seasons, we shot 2 episodes on Radio Free Europe yesterday and today, and we took footage in Prague. We filmed at the Radio Free Europe offices in Prague. So I think it might be interesting to screen this in Prague, at least some of the episodes.
I'm asking, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, because I think it's a really very important movie for many reasons that even makes me dizzy. So I would like to show this movie as soon as possible in the Czech Republic. So maybe we can talk afterwards about the possibilities, how to support you to bring it to the Czech Republic, in which context, if you need context to the TV, or if it would be possible also for us for a discussion in the institute, or however. Okay.
Let's stay in touch after, and thank you very much for your words. And I think idea is great, and we should.
Thank you.
Try to organize it.
Hi, I'm from Bucharest. Ionice is my name, and I watched in the movie the episode of terrorist attack against Free Europe station in Munich, which you mentioned was organized by the Romanian Communist Securitate. And you have also Richard Cummings, who was the chief of security in that time, and he published a book about this attack. And my question is if you have any intention to develop more about this moment, about this attack, because the only attack against Free Europe was organized by the Romanian communist regime and by Romanian Securitate. They tried to kill all the journalists there in the Romanian department of Free Europe. I think it's need more to explain about this sad episode.
W następnych
In later seasons, in later episodes, we returned to terrorist attacks on people associated with Radio Free Europe. There were more such attacks, but in fact, that was the most important attack against the institution. And it had been financed and logistically organized by the Securitate. But there was also the death of a Bulgarian journalist from the Bulgarian section, Grigory Markov, murdered at Waterloo Station in London by being stabbed with a poisoned umbrella. And as far as we know, this was organized and financed by the Bulgarians. There were also attacks on music journalists, I think also a music DJ who had a program, I don't remember his name, but we did devote part of an episode to him. Kornel Drabic, who was also murdered, the author of a very popular music show. There were different attempts, that there was infiltration and special operations against Free Europe, which in the Polish operational language, it was called Hornets. Codenamed Hornets, this operation. These journalists were kept under surveillance, and we did special episodes on the surveillance, the infiltration of Free Europe. There were three Polish agents, Captain Andrzej Mietkowski, extremely harmful, Officer Lach, and another agent who was active until the very end of Free Europe over decades. My colleague, someone I worked with, Bożekowski, of whom we know today from documents that he offered to blow up the whole building if only ordered to do so. But he was deemed too irresponsible and too insane to carry out such a fine operation. There were Soviet agents on board. The deputy director of the broadcasting studio of Radio Svoboda, Radio Liberty, was a KGB agent, and so on and so forth. So we did address this subject, only it didn't make it into the compilation that we showed today. Does anyone have any other questions? I don't see any. Andrzej, I would like to ask you about a different issue, not related to journalism or less related to journalism. From the period after you returned to Poland, I'd like to ask you about your time working for Radio Free Europe. What were your days like? How was it organized? How was the radio organized? Over there, you worked in Paris, if I remember.
Nie miałem nic wspólnego z...
Yes, I have nothing to do with journalism. I studied astronomy, but the martial law found me in Paris. And my friend, Maciej Morawski, my master from Free Europe, encouraged me to take this path. And I'm crawling on this path till today. In Free Europe in Paris, there were few of us cooperating. The office was in the very center under the Eiffel Tower. There were journalists working for the Russian section. Together with Maciej Morawski, there was a Hungarian Janos Heller, who was saved by Raoul Wallenberg from Hungary in 1944. There was a Romanian lady, Monica Iovinescu, excellent journalist. She was also a victim of an attack by unknown perpetrators who have beaten her. We were just running around the city collecting information about Polish immigration and also about things that might be interested to Poles, about activities of the French government or trade unions or social organizations, trade unions that were helping Solidarność at that time, various activities of Solidarność with prisoners and also in the Invalids Esplanade in the center of Paris around the Polish embassy. There were demonstrations, manifestations, rally. You could find Yves Montand, Simone Signoret, Gérard Depardieu, who didn't have the Soviet citizenship at the time. He was not in love with Soviet leaders, but he was helping Solidarity. He was the actor of Vajda just after Danton film. And we sent
materiały, które...
to Munich, to the headquarters, the materials that we were able to collect, and they were put in the air as short fragments, 2-3 minutes. Free Europe had offices in several cities of Europe and the United States, in every big capital, Paris, London, Vienna, Stockholm, Madrid, San Francisco, New York, there were, and others. There were offices of Free Europe. There were correspondents everywhere. They had the task to talk about what is happening in these places and what is related to the country to which they broadcast. But especially the office in Paris and in Vienna was trying to find people coming from Poland and ask them about what is happening in Poland, because Free Europe, without any direct contacts with the country, with Poland, was very well informed about what is happening in Poland, both within the opposition circles and within the authorities. I'm talking about the Polish section of Free Europe. And it was because of great activeness of the information correspondents who were not supposed to broadcast information, but to collect information. They were written down on pieces of paper, anonymized. There was a special code that was used. It was a type of kind of white intelligence. So the collectors of information in the offices of Free Europe were using this code together with the office with Munich. There were no names next to these, but out of the codes we knew where did they come from, these pieces of information. And in Munich there was a center of evaluation, so analyzing in the information and their credibility or reliability. Some were put aside to check if they were from the second or third source. There was some information that was later corroborated, and then it was decided that this is reliable. Kazimierz Zamorski was managing all that. He was outstanding. What intelligence. He had this Bureau of Information. There were always communist agents that tried to push into that because they could feel who's the informer of Free Europe in the country. Yes, because these people, this information that you talk about, you started saying that there were offices in various places of Europe, but also behind the Iron Curtain, those secret kind of agents. Władysław Bartoszewski was the most famous. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, ambassador, a huge personality. He knew Nowak from the occupation, from the Home Army, from the resistance movement. And then Nowak was in the West. Bartoszewski was in the Polish prison of the Polish People's Republic. And after he left the prison, he started to send information to Free Europe through embassies and other channels. There were more such informers, of course. In case of Professor Bartoszewski, a big role in forwarding information was played by the Austrian Institute and Austrian contacts of Professor Bartoszewski. Professor Paweł Machcewicz has written a book about Free Europe Radio and this cooperation. This is called Munich Menagerie. It's also in English, thanks to the support of the European network of solidarity in the United States by one of the university publishing houses. After 1990, where Free Europe has opened, it was the 3rd of May 1990 in Warsaw, and later, a few days later, in Prague. And I was one of the heads of bosses of this office, of this bureau. And this was a facility that took over a lot of the program of the Polish radio. With time, after 2 years, dozen plus people moved from Munich to Warsaw, and in Free Europe there were only transmitters. And the whole thing was created here. We had a network of correspondents in Eastern Europe. We had correspondents in Moscow starting in 1990, in Prague, in Bratislava, in Budapest, Bucharest, in all capitals of Eastern Europe. And this program has shifted completely into the East. This is from where from we worked on the war in the Balkans. I was a correspondent in Sarajevo for some time. We did also the coups in Russia. I was during one of them in Moscow. For some reason, all telephones were working, and we could use government phone from the roof of their parliament, and you could get connected with Free Europe and make a broadcast about the fact that there are tanks riding around the city. These were crazy experiences. I wish more such crazy experiences, but does Free Europe Radio, do they have their Russian journalists? Yeah, they do. Radio Svoboda, because Free Europe, and there was Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Radio Free Europe, these were Eastern European countries, plus 3 Baltic republics. This was a political gesture, because Americans never accepted the annexation of these 3 countries. This is why they put them within Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty would broadcast all over the Soviet Union in all those different languages of the Soviet Union. Afterwards, the European countries, well, it didn't make sense anymore to continue to broadcast there, but there were programs in the Balkans, and they started to open new programs that would broadcast in various languages for Afghanistan, for Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, the Middle East. After the first Yanayev coup, Yeltsin, understanding the rank of Liberty Radio during that coup, and the fact that he could actually talk through Radio Liberty to Russians, because it was not clear what the media would support, Yeltsin took the decision to give Radio Svoboda a license that was put in the building in Prague, but the times have changed, and Putin, that came after Yeltsin, decided that this is an institution of a foreign agent first, so under a special supervision financed from abroad, and then they just kicked them out. He just kicked them out. He kicked out correspondents for cooperation for Radio Svoboda. Today, there are the worst consequences you could imagine, but Svoboda Radio is still broadcasting from Prague. And I see someone else would like to ask a question. I am Grzegorz Gołębiowski from Lublin, and I lead society or association of journalists. I wanted to ask, because I think it would be worth it to answer the question if it is true that the collapse of communism in Europe was medicine for any evil, because it could seem that once the communism collapses, then all evil would collapse. Well, we know that communism collapsed, and we know that we have the regime in Belarus, we have Russia. So the collapse of communism in the end didn't make it good everywhere as it should be. If we would compare nowadays Belarus with the Belarus of previous president, who was the last head of the highest council in Belarus, or the contemporary Russia with the Russia of Mikhail Gorbachev, or for instance to compare the Belarusian regime or Russian regime with Polish regime at the time of the last prime minister under socialism, Rakowski, because former Prime Minister Rakowski also has a good press as liberal, as the creator of economic freedom, because we talk about Rakowski's laws saying that this is the beginning of capitalism, that there was this economic freedom, the law from 1988. So this is quite significant if we were trying to compare these regimes. So is it true that it's better now in Belarus when we compare to President Shushkevich and others? But you have asked, if you could ask a question. I mean, if the collapse of communism resulted in the fact that now it's better in the Putin's Russia, if we would compare to Russia under Gorbachev, who received a Nobel Prize, although some say that it was not right, or the current Belarus with the Belarus of President Shushkevich, because we see that not everywhere the collapse of communism really worked. We might even feel that it's worse in some republics. Okay, I understand, but you don't believe that we should go back to communism. No, but this is about a certain comparison, that not everywhere it really worked, that the communism collapsed, but we are not happy with the situation, like in Russia, etc. Okay, thank you very much for this question. Andrzej, would you like to answer? I'm very happy with the collapse of communism, and the fact that you asked this question here is, in my opinion, a material proof of the fact that at least here in our area, the collapse of communism was a step forward, a step into a good direction. Russia, I don't think communism really collapsed, and Belarus the same, because Putin and Lukashenko are both a pure product of this regime, of communist regime. They created their careers there. They trained under communism. We know where Putin did that in KGB, as KGB officer in Eastern Germany, and Lukashenko in kolkhoz, and there was no black line there. It's not a communism today as it was imagined by the founding fathers of the system, but I believe that this is not a system far away from communism. It's just a bit transformed. These considerations are purely academic. I don't know what kind of premise we could build around it, and what would you like to state here? That communism shouldn't have collapsed, or well, you feel better, I feel better. I think everyone who sit here are doing quite well. So well, I don't know if others are better or worse, but well, the consideration, I think that this is very academic discussion, how to define the system which we have currently in Belarus or in Russia. No. Is there anyone else in this room who would like to ask a question? I just would like to ask you, Andrzej, at the end, how? Because you have so many possibilities to use materials more and more. I understand that there are archives that are difficult to reach. We can talk about it. Maybe we are able somehow support you. I don't know if we can afford such archives. Well, I'm opening my ears very wide, but we can try. But as an employee of the television, you should have great capabilities, possibilities now. But I would like to ask you, how do you see the future of using archival materials in the nearest future? Because this film doesn't have much context. In order to understand it, to feel it, you have to have some knowledge. So, for instance, children who are in high schools nowadays, without any personal experience and any knowledge that they get out of their own homes, because such children exist, would have a difficulty understanding it. So how do you see the future of using materials, original materials, for educational work?
Ten film jeszcze raz
So once again, this film was not created to be broadcast. It was merely an auxiliary material for the competition jury. So every episode in the series was devoted to a particular topic: Budapest 1956, censorship, political, Stalinist politics, the escape by plane from Poland to Bornholm, the death of Stalin, December 1970 in Poland, the election of the Pope, the birth of solidarity. These are some examples of topics. Right now, we have quite a lot of social media history channels. So you can go online, and especially the Russian internet, where lots of archival materials have been uploaded to the internet during a certain period, a period of relative freedom. Perhaps they regret it these days, but people uploaded their family materials to the web. Quite a lot of materials in Russian are available. So now if you search for, say, the Great Purges of the 1930s, the Great Terror, or if you narrow it down by topic, you can find huge quantities of very interesting material. What's important is for today's educational programs on the curriculum level for them to include such materials, because I don't see that happening. I was invited because my son was in a high school class where they were talking about Gustav Herling-Grudzinski, the writer, because I was invited. I'm making a film about Herling-Grudzinski, and I was invited to go to his school because I have certain unique artifacts at home. So I did a presentation, 120 slides, which took about 3 hours. The whole school came. The teachers and the kids were very interested, history teachers. Polish teachers and history and contemporary times hit teachers. They watched it with red cheeks and then listening to recordings of Grudziński talk about the Gulag and the other world. So that opened my eyes to the educational possibilities. It can't be a lecture type of delivery anymore. We need a screen. We need multimedia. We need to be showing things. We need illustrations. As you saw here, the top writers of Polish literature, Gombrowicz, Miłosz, Czapski, Herling, Grudziński, talking about their books. That's how education should be structured today. It should include archival materials. And the Polish radio archive materials, archives where I've been for 3 months, what they have is just stunning. The potential it has for education, for educators, for those passionate about these subjects. It's hard to screen it on a big public channel, but those in charge of creating curricula should not neglect this. It should be made part of the education process. Definitely, we will try to come up with projects that can draw upon these materials, and I assume the situation is analogous in other countries. We must wrap up the meeting. I think there will be opportunities to talk to Andrzej during the break. Thank you so much, not just for choosing our panel and for staying with us to the end. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you.